The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on Congress Avenue as Marcus Thompson carefully arranged his art supplies on the sidewalk. At 22, his weathered hands told stories of countless hours spent gripping brushes and charcoal sticks, creating beauty from nothing but imagination and determination. The worn backpack beside him contained everything he owned. A few changes of clothes, 3 paintbrushes he'd managed to keep from better days, and a collection of acrylic paints that were running dangerously low. Austin's downtown bustled with the usual mix of tourists, office workers, and street performers. But Marcus barely noticed the chaos around him. His focus remained fixed on the blank canvas propped against a small easel, a gift from his late grandmother that had somehow survived 3 moves and 2 evictions. The morning air carried the familiar scent of food trucks and the distant sound of live music that never seemed to stop in this city. Another day, another chance, Marcus whispered to himself, a mantra his grandmother used to repeat during her own struggles as a single mother raising him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 8. His stomach growled, reminding him that yesterday's single meal, a shared sandwich from Sarah Mitchell, a kind stranger who'd bought one of his smaller pieces, was now a distant memory. The $23.47 in his pocket represented his entire fortune, and rent was due in 4 days. The small studio apartment he shared with 2 roommates wasn't much, but it was shelter, and losing it would mean sleeping in Zilker Park again. Marcus opened his paint tubes, carefully squeezing out small amounts of burnt umber, titanium white, and cadmium yellow onto his makeshift palette. A piece of cardboard he'd rescued from a dumpster behind an art supply store. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd been laid off from that same store 3 weeks earlier when the owner decided to downsize. Art doesn't pay the bills, his former boss, Mr. Henderson, had said while handing him his final paycheck. You're talented, kid, but talent doesn't keep the lights on. The words still stung, but Marcus refused to let them define his future. He'd grown up listening to country music, particularly Willie Nelson, whose songs about struggle, perseverance, and finding beauty in life's hardships had become the soundtrack to his own journey. His grandmother had been a huge fan, playing On the Road Again and Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain, while she worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. As Marcus began sketching the outline of his next piece, he noticed an elderly woman approaching. Sarah Mitchell, a retired elementary school teacher in her 70s, had become a familiar face over the past week. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, and she wore a floral dress that seemed to brighten even the grayest Austin morning. "Good morning, Marcus," Sarah called out, her voice carrying the warm drawl that made Texas feel like home. "What masterpiece are you creating today?" Marcus looked up from his canvas and smiled, the first genuine smile he'd managed in days. "Morning, Mrs. Mitchell. I'm thinking about painting Willie Nelson today. You know, pay tribute to a legend while hopefully earning enough for dinner." Sarah's eyes lit up with interest. She'd lived in Austin for 40 years and had seen Willie Nelson perform more times than she could count. "That's a wonderful idea, dear. Willie means so much to this city. Have you ever seen him perform?" "Only in my dreams," Marcus replied, mixing colors on his palette. "Grandma used to play his music constantly, said he understood what it meant to struggle and still find reasons to sing." "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman," Sarah observed, settling onto a nearby bench. "Would you mind if I watched you work for a bit? I find it fascinating how you bring these portraits to life." Marcus nodded, grateful for the company. Loneliness had become as constant as hunger in recent weeks, and Sarah's presence provided a warmth that went beyond the Texas heat. He began working on the basic structure of the portrait, his hands moving with practiced confidence despite the uncertainty that plagued every other aspect of his life. As he painted, Marcus shared stories about his grandmother, how she'd encouraged his artistic pursuits even when money was tight, how she'd saved up to buy him his first real set of paints for his 16th birthday, and how she'd made him promise to never give up on his dreams, no matter how impossible they seemed. "She sounds like she raised you right," Sarah commented, watching as Marcus's brushstrokes began to form the familiar features of Willie Nelson's weathered but kind face. "This city needs more young people like you, ones who aren't afraid to chase their dreams, even when it's difficult." The morning crowd began to thicken as office workers hurried to their jobs, some pausing briefly to glance at Marcus's developing artwork. A few dropped coins into the small coffee can he'd placed beside his easel, though most simply walked by without acknowledgement. Marcus had learned not to take it personally. Everyone had their own struggles, their own destinations. Around 11 o'clock, a middle-aged man in a business suit stopped and studied the painting intently. His expression was unreadable as he examined Marcus's technique. The way the young artist captured not just Willie Nelson's physical features, but something deeper, the soul of a man who'd lived through decades of triumph and hardship. "That's remarkable work," the businessman finally said, pulling out his wallet. "How much for a custom portrait?" Marcus's heart raced. Custom work paid significantly more than his usual pieces. "It depends on the size and detail level, sir. A portrait like this would typically run about $60. The man nodded and handed Marcus a business card. "I'm James Patterson. I run a small gallery downtown. Would you be interested in doing a portrait of my late father? I can pay you up front." Marcus stared at the business card, hardly believing what he was hearing. "Yes, sir. Absolutely." James Patterson counted out $60 and added an extra $20. "For art supplies," he explained. "I'll come by tomorrow with a photo of my father. Take your time with it. Good art can't be rushed." As Patterson walked away, Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes. $80 represented more money than he'd seen in weeks. It meant food. It meant making rent. It meant hope. Sarah smiled knowingly from her bench. "See? Sometimes the universe rewards persistence. Your grandmother would be proud." Marcus wiped his eyes and continued working on Willie Nelson's portrait, pouring his gratitude and renewed hope into every brush stroke. The painting seemed to come alive under his hands, Willie's distinctive braids and weathered features emerging with startling clarity and emotional depth. By early afternoon, a small crowd had gathered to watch Marcus work. Word had spread among the downtown regulars about the talented young artist, and people began stopping by specifically to see his latest creation. The Willie Nelson portrait drew particular attention, with several older residents sharing their own memories of seeing the country legend perform at local venues. "I saw him at the Armadillo World Headquarters back in '73, shared an elderly gentleman with a thick Texas accent. "Best damn show I ever witnessed. That man's got magic in his voice." "He still performs at his ranch sometimes," added a woman in her 50s. "Friend of mine went to one of his 4th of July picnics. Said Willie looked exactly like your painting. Like he's seen everything, but still believes in the good in people." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across Congress Avenue, Marcus put the finishing touches on Willie Nelson's eyes, the most crucial part of any portrait. They had to capture not just the physical appearance, but the essence of the subject. In Willie's case, that meant conveying decades of wisdom, pain, joy, and an unwavering commitment to authenticity. Sarah had remained on her bench most of the day, occasionally bringing Marcus water or snacks from nearby vendors. She'd become more than just a customer. She'd become a friend, a surrogate grandmother figure who reminded him that kindness still existed in the world. "It's beautiful, dear," Sarah said, as Marcus stepped back to examine his day's work. "You've captured something special there." Willie Nelson isn't just a musician in your painting. He's a symbol of resilience, of staying true to yourself no matter what. Marcus nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The portrait had become more than just a potential source of income. It had become a reflection of his own journey, his own determination to keep creating despite the obstacles. As he began cleaning his brushes in a small jar of turpentine, Marcus noticed the crowd had grown larger. People were pointing at his painting, taking photos, and discussing the emotional impact of his work. Some dropped additional donations in his coffee can, while others inquired about commissioning their own portraits. The day that had started with desperation and hunger was ending with hope and possibility. Marcus had earned enough money to cover rent, buy groceries, and restock his art supplies. More importantly, he'd connected with people who appreciated his work and understood the value of art in bringing communities together. "Thank you, Grandma," Marcus whispered as he carefully wrapped the Willie Nelson portrait for transport back to his apartment. "I'm still chasing those dreams, just like you told me to." Sarah overheard and smiled. "She's watching over you, dear. I can tell. And tomorrow's going to be an even better day." As Marcus packed up his supplies and prepared to head home, he couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah was right. Something was shifting in his life, something that went beyond the day's financial success. The Willie Nelson portrait had tapped into something deeper, connecting him not just to his audience, but to his own sense of purpose as an artist. The first chapter of what would become a life-changing week was coming to a close, but Marcus Thompson's real story was just beginning. Marcus arrived at his usual spot on Congress Avenue earlier than normal, the morning dew still clinging to the sidewalk as he set up his easel. The Willie Nelson portrait had captured more attention than any of his previous work, and he was eager to continue developing it. The extra details he wanted to add, the subtle lines around Willie's eyes that spoke of laughter and hardship, the texture of his distinctive braids, would require careful attention and perfect lighting. The early morning silence of downtown Austin provided the perfect environment for detailed work. Street cleaners hummed in the distance, and the occasional jogger passed by. But the usual chaos of foot traffic wouldn't begin for another hour. Marcus cherished these quiet moments when he could work without distractions, allowing his artistic instincts to guide each brushstroke. As he mixed colors on his palette, Marcus noticed a man approaching with a guitar case slung over his shoulder. The stranger appeared to be in his 30s, with calloused fingers that immediately identified him as a serious musician, and a worn leather jacket that suggested years of performing. His walk had the easy confidence of someone comfortable with both solitude and crowds. "Mind if I set up nearby?" the musician asked, his voice carrying a slight accent that wasn't quite Texan but definitely Southern. "I try not to intrude on other artists' territory." Marcus looked up from his canvas and nodded. "Of course, man. I'm Marcus Thompson, always happy to share the space with fellow artists." "David Rodriguez," the musician replied, extending his hand for a firm handshake. "I've been hearing about your portrait work from folks around town. Mind if I take a look?" Marcus gestured toward his easel, where Willie Nelson's face was beginning to emerge with startling realism. David studied the painting carefully, his expression growing more impressed with each passing moment. "Damn, that's incredible," David said, genuine admiration in his voice. "You've captured something most people miss about Willie. It's not just his appearance, it's his spirit, his authenticity. That's rare, especially in someone so young." "Thanks," Marcus replied, feeling a familiar warmth at the recognition. "My grandmother always said that good portraits reveal the subject's soul, not just their face." Willie Nelson has one of those faces that tells a story. David nodded and began unpacking his guitar, a well-worn acoustic that showed signs of countless performances. "I've been playing Willie's songs for years. There's something about his approach to music that speaks to working people, you know? No pretense, no artificial polish, just honest emotion and real stories. As David tuned his guitar and Marcus continued painting, a natural rhythm developed between them. David would play soft instrumental versions of classic country songs, Willie Nelson, Johnny Cash, Merle Haggard, while Marcus worked, the music providing a perfect soundtrack for the artistic process. The first wave of morning commuters began appearing around 8 o'clock, and several stopped to appreciate the unique collaboration taking place on the sidewalk. A young professional woman paused on her way to work, mesmerized by the combination of Marcus's visual artistry and David's musical accompaniment. "This is beautiful," she said, dropping a $5 bill into Marcus's coffee can and another into David's open guitar case. "You two should perform together regularly. It's like watching Austin's creative spirit come alive." Marcus and David exchanged glances, both recognizing the potential in their impromptu partnership. They'd independently chosen the same corner for their respective arts, and the combination was clearly resonating with passersby. "What do you think?" David asked during a break between songs. "Want to make this a regular thing? I come here most mornings anyway, and your work draws a crowd that appreciates good music." "I'd love that," Marcus replied, adding shadows to Willie Nelson's weathered cheeks. "Music always helps me paint better. Something about the rhythm influences my brushstrokes." Sarah Mitchell arrived around 10 o'clock, carrying a thermos of coffee and a bag of breakfast pastries from a nearby bakery. She'd become a regular fixture during Marcus's morning sessions, and her maternal presence had started attracting other regular observers who enjoyed watching the young artist work. "Good morning, boys," Sarah called out, settling onto her usual bench. "I brought coffee and kolaches. Can't have Austin's finest artists working on empty stomachs." Marcus gratefully accepted the coffee, realizing he'd been so focused on painting that he'd forgotten about breakfast. The warm pastry reminded him of similar treats his grandmother used to bring home from her job at a local bakery. Another memory that connected his current struggles to her enduring influence on his life. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is David Rodriguez," Marcus said, introducing his new musical partner. "He's been providing the perfect soundtrack for painting." Sarah shook David's hand warmly. "Any friend of Marcus is a friend of mine. Are you from Austin originally?" "San Antonio, actually," David replied. "Moved here about 5 years ago chasing the music scene. Austin's got something special, a respect for authentic artistry that's hard to find elsewhere." As the morning progressed, more people began stopping to watch the collaboration between visual and musical art. Some were regulars who'd been following Marcus's work, while others were newcomers drawn by the unique atmosphere David's presence had created. The Willie Nelson portrait continued evolving, gaining depth and emotional resonance with each careful addition. Around 11:30, James Patterson returned as promised, carrying a manila envelope containing photographs of his late father. He seemed pleased to find Marcus's setup had expanded to include live musical accompaniment. "This is impressive," Patterson said, observing the small crowd that had gathered. "You're creating more than just art here. You're building community. My gallery could use artists who understand that art is about connection, not just individual expression." Patterson handed Marcus the photographs and examined the Willie Nelson portrait more closely. "This has really developed since yesterday. The emotional depth you've achieved is remarkable. Have you considered submitting work to local shows or competitions?" A power. Marcus hadn't considered formal exhibitions, mainly because he'd been focused on survival rather than career advancement. "I've never really thought about it. I've been concentrating on paying rent and buying food." "Understandable," Patterson nodded. "But you're talented enough to move beyond street art, if that's what you want. I'd be happy to help you prepare a portfolio for some upcoming shows." Austin has several venues that specifically support emerging artists. David overheard the conversation and added his perspective. There's a monthly showcase at the Saxon Pub, where visual artists display work while musicians perform. It's exactly the kind of venue that would appreciate what you're doing here. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the sudden influx of opportunities and support. After weeks of struggling alone, he was discovering a community of people willing to help him develop his career. The Willie Nelson portrait seemed to be serving as a catalyst, attracting exactly the right people at the right moment. "Take your time with my father's portrait," Patterson continued. "Good art can't be rushed, and I'd rather wait for quality work than settle for something quick. Here's my card. Call me when you're ready to discuss gallery representation." After Patterson left, Marcus sat back and looked at his painting with fresh eyes. Willie Nelson's face gazed back at him with a mixture of wisdom and kindness that seemed almost lifelike. The portrait was becoming something special, not just technically, but emotionally. It was capturing the essence of a man who dedicated his life to authentic artistic expression, despite numerous obstacles and setbacks. "You know what's interesting about Willie Nelson?" David mused, playing a soft version of Crazy while Marcus worked. "He didn't achieve major success until he was in his 40s. Before that, he was just another struggling songwriter in Nashville, getting his songs recorded by other people but never getting the recognition he deserved." Marcus paused his painting, brush in hand. "Really? I always assumed he'd been famous his whole career." "Nope," David continued, transitioning into "On the Road Again." He had to leave Nashville and come back to Texas to find his authentic voice. Sometimes you have to step away from what everyone else thinks you should be doing and trust your own instincts. The parallel to his own situation wasn't lost on Marcus. He'd been trying to fit into conventional employment while suppressing his artistic ambitions, and it had led to frustration and failure. Maybe the path forward required embracing his identity as an artist rather than fighting it. Sarah had been listening to their conversation while knitting a scarf, occasionally looking up to watch Marcus work. "Willie Nelson is a perfect subject for your first major piece," she observed. "He represents authenticity in a world that often rewards pretense. That's exactly what your art is about, showing people's true selves." As the lunch crowd began appearing, Marcus noticed the increased foot traffic was leading to more sales. Several people commissioned small portraits on the spot, while others purchased prints of his previous work that he'd started bringing along. David's music was creating an atmosphere that encouraged people to linger and appreciate art, rather than simply walking past. A local food blogger stopped to document the collaboration, interviewing both artists about their backgrounds and artistic processes. She seemed particularly interested in how their different art forms complemented each other, and the community that was developing around their morning sessions. "This is exactly what Austin is about," she said, taking notes while Marcus painted and David played. Authentic artists supporting each other and creating spaces where people can experience genuine creativity. "I'm writing a piece about grassroots art communities, and you two represent everything that makes this city special." By mid-afternoon, the Willie Nelson portrait was nearing completion. Marcus had captured not just the physical likeness, but something deeper, the spirit of resilience and authenticity that had made Willie Nelson a Texas legend. The painting seemed to radiate warmth and wisdom, drawing viewers into an emotional connection with the subject. "It's beautiful, Marcus," Sarah said, studying the nearly finished work. "You've created something that would make Willie himself proud. This isn't just a portrait. It's a tribute to everything he represents." Marcus stepped back to examine his work objectively. The painting had exceeded his own expectations, becoming something more powerful than he'd originally envisioned. It was his best work to date, but more than that, it was a statement about the importance of staying true to one's artistic vision despite external pressures. David played a gentle instrumental version of Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain, as Marcus added the final details to Willie's weathered hands and distinctive braids. The music seemed to guide his brush strokes, creating a synergy between visual and auditory art that enhanced both forms of expression. As the afternoon sun began casting longer shadows across Congress Avenue, Marcus realized that Chapter 2 of his journey was about more than just improving his art or earning money. It was about discovering community, finding collaborators who shared his values, and beginning to see himself as a professional artist rather than just someone trying to survive through creative work. The Willie Nelson portrait would soon be finished, but Marcus sensed that completing it would mark the beginning of something larger rather than the end of a project. The painting was becoming a symbol of transformation, both his own evolution as an artist and his growing understanding of art's power to bring people together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but for the first time in months, Marcus felt confident about facing them. He had allies now, supporters who believed in his talent and were willing to help him develop it. The foundation for a sustainable artistic career was being laid, one brush stroke and one song at a time. The third morning brought an unexpected chill to Austin, with gray clouds threatening rain and a wind that made Marcus's easel wobble precariously. He'd arrived early again, but this time he wasn't alone. David was already there, tuning his guitar and humming softly to himself. The musician had beaten him to their informal meeting spot, a dedication that spoke to his commitment to their growing partnership. "Morning, Marcus," David called out, looking up from his instrument. "Weather's looking rough, but I figured we'd tough it out. Real artists don't let a little Texas weather stop them, right?" Marcus smiled as he set up his easel, carefully positioning the Willie Nelson portrait to catch the limited natural light filtering through the overcast sky. Grandma used to say that the best art comes from difficult days. Something about struggle bringing out authentic emotion. The portrait was now in its final stages, requiring only detail work and subtle adjustments that would bring Willie's face to life. Marcus had spent the previous evening studying photographs of the country legend, paying particular attention to the lines around his eyes and the texture of his weathered skin. Each mark on Willie's face told a story, and Marcus was determined to honor those stories in his painting. Sarah arrived shortly after 8 o'clock, bundled in a light jacket and carrying her usual thermos of coffee. She'd become such a consistent presence that Marcus had started thinking of her as his unofficial manager. The way she encouraged visitors to appreciate his work and often facilitated conversations between him and potential customers. "Looks like we might get some weather today," Sarah observed, settling onto her bench with a slight grimace that spoke to her arthritis. "But I've seen you work in worse conditions, dear. Remember last week when that sudden downpour hit?" Marcus remembered well. He'd spent 20 minutes crouched over his easel, using his own jacket to protect a half-finished portrait from the rain while potential customers scattered for cover. Sarah had been the only one who'd stayed, holding an umbrella over his work until the storm passed. It was that kind of loyalty that had transformed their relationship from customer and artist to something approaching family. As David began his morning set with a gentle instrumental version of "Mamas Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Cowboys," Marcus noticed that their regular crowd was already beginning to form. Word had spread throughout the downtown Austin community about the young painter and the musician who'd created something special on Congress Avenue. People were starting to plan their morning commutes to include a stop at Marcus's corner, treating it like an impromptu gallery opening every day. "You know," David said between songs, "we should probably think about what happens when this portrait is finished. It's been drawing people in, but what's your next project?" Marcus had been wondering the same thing. The Willie Nelson painting had become his masterpiece, the work that was establishing his reputation. But he couldn't paint Willie Nelson portraits forever. He needed to expand his range while maintaining the emotional depth that made his current work so compelling. "I've been thinking about a series," Marcus replied, adding subtle highlights to Willie's braided hair. "Maybe portraits of other Texas music legends, Janis Joplin, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Bob Wills, people who represent the same kind of authentic artistry that Willie does." "That's brilliant," Sarah interjected, looking up from her knitting. "Texas has such a rich musical heritage, and you have a gift for capturing the soul behind the fame. A series like that could really establish your reputation." David nodded enthusiastically while transitioning into a soft version of Texas Flood. "I know people who knew Stevie Ray personally. They'd probably love to see him honored in your style. And Janis Joplin. She's got that same raw authenticity that you captured in Willie." Around 10 o'clock, the morning routine was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. A woman in her 40s approached the small crowd that had gathered around Marcus's easel, her expensive clothes and confident stride suggesting she wasn't a typical street art patron. She studied the Willie Nelson portrait intently, taking notes in a small leather-bound notebook. "Excuse me," she said, addressing Marcus directly. "I'm Rebecca Martinez from the Austin American-Statesman. I'm writing a feature story about street art and its impact on downtown culture. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions?" Marcus felt his stomach flutter with nervous excitement. Being featured in the city's primary newspaper could change everything, bringing exposure, new customers, and validation as a legitimate artist. He set down his brush and wiped his hands on a paint-stained rag. "Of course," Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm Marcus Thompson. This is David Rodriguez, my musical collaborator." Rebecca Martinez spent the next 30 minutes conducting a thorough interview, asking about Marcus's background, his artistic process, and his plans for the future. She seemed particularly interested in how his collaboration with David had evolved and the community that had formed around their daily performances. "What makes your work different from other street artists?" Martinez asked, photographing the Willie Nelson portrait from multiple angles. Marcus thought carefully before responding. "I try to capture more than just physical likeness. Every face tells a story, and my job is to honor that story. Willie Nelson, for example. He's not just a famous musician. He's a symbol of staying true to yourself despite pressure to conform. That's what I try to show in my portraits." Martinez scribbled notes furiously, occasionally pausing to take additional photos. She interviewed several members of the growing crowd, asking about their experiences watching Marcus work and how his presence had impacted their daily routines. "He's become part of what makes downtown Austin special," said Jennifer Walsh, an office worker who'd been stopping by regularly for the past week. "I look forward to my morning walk now because I get to see art being created in real time. It's inspiring to watch someone pursue their dreams so publicly." An older gentleman named Robert Chen, who owned a nearby restaurant, added his perspective. "This young man brings culture to our neighborhood. People linger longer. They appreciate the area more. It's good for everyone. The artist, the community, local businesses. This is what authentic Austin looks like." After the interview concluded, Martinez handed Marcus her business card. "The article should run this weekend in our arts and culture section. I'll make sure to include information about where people can find your work. Keep doing what you're doing. Austin needs more artists like you." As Martinez left, Marcus felt a mixture of excitement and pressure. Newspaper coverage could bring opportunities he'd never imagined, but it also meant increased expectations and scrutiny. The Willie Nelson portrait would now represent him to a much larger audience than the daily crowd on Congress Avenue. "That's incredible, Marcus," David said, launching into a celebratory version of "Good-Hearted Woman." "Newspaper coverage could change everything for you." Are you ready for that kind of attention? Marcus considered the question while adding final touches to Willie's distinctive nose. I think so. I mean, this is what I've been working toward. Recognition as a serious artist. It's just happening faster than I expected. Sarah smiled knowingly from her bench. Sometimes the universe moves quickly when you're on the right path, dear. Your grandmother would be so proud to see you getting this recognition. The rest of the morning brought a steady stream of visitors, many of whom seemed more engaged and appreciative than usual. Word was spreading through social media as people photographed Marcus's work and shared it with friends. Several art students from the University of Texas stopped by, asking detailed questions about his technique and artistic philosophy. One student, a junior named Ashley Morgan, was particularly interested in Marcus's use of color to convey emotion. The way you've used warm browns and golds in Willie's skin tones, it makes him look wise and kind, not just old. How do you decide which colors will create specific emotional responses? Marcus found himself enjoying the teaching aspect of these interactions. Explaining his artistic choices helped him understand his own process better while sharing knowledge with aspiring artists. Color temperature affects how we perceive personality, he explained while demonstrating shading techniques. Warm colors suggest approachability and wisdom, while cool colors can create distance or melancholy. Willie Nelson has always seemed like a warm person to me, so I used colors that would convey that feeling. By lunchtime, the Willie Nelson portrait was essentially complete. Marcus stepped back to examine his work objectively and felt a surge of pride at what he'd accomplished. The painting captured not just Willie's physical appearance, but his essence, the combination of toughness and gentleness, wisdom and playfulness that had made him a beloved figure in American music. David played "On the Road Again" as Marcus signed his name in the bottom right corner, officially completing what had become his breakthrough piece. The small crowd that had gathered applauded spontaneously, recognizing they'd witnessed the completion of something special. "It's beautiful, Marcus," Sarah said, her eyes glistening with emotion. "You've created something that would make Willie himself proud." This painting captures everything that makes him special. As afternoon clouds began clearing and sunshine broke through, Marcus realized he was at a crossroads. The Willie Nelson portrait represented the culmination of everything he'd learned about art and life, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter. With newspaper coverage coming and growing recognition throughout Austin, he had opportunities to expand beyond street art and establish himself as a professional artist. The question now was what to do next. Several gallery owners had expressed interest in his work. Art students were seeking him out for guidance, and commissions were starting to come in regularly. The financial pressure that had driven him to the streets was easing, replaced by the more complex challenge of managing a developing career. "So, what's next?" David asked, packing up his guitar as the lunch crowd dispersed. "You've conquered Willie Nelson. Who's your next subject?" Marcus looked at his completed masterpiece one more time before carefully covering it with a protective cloth. "I think it's time to start that Texas Music Legends series we discussed. But first, I want to take this painting somewhere special." "Where?" Sarah asked, gathering her knitting supplies. "Willie Nelson's ranch," Marcus replied, surprising himself with the boldness of the idea. "I want him to see it. If this painting is really as good as everyone says, maybe the man who inspired it should have the chance to experience it firsthand." David and Sarah exchanged glances, both recognizing the ambitious nature of Marcus's plan. Willie Nelson's Luck Ranch was a legendary location in Texas music history, but it wasn't exactly open to uninvited visitors. Still, they'd both seen how Marcus's determination and authenticity had already opened doors that seemed impossible just days before. "That's either the best idea you've ever had or completely crazy," David said with a grin. "Knowing you, it's probably both. And knowing Willie, he might just appreciate the gesture. As Chapter 3 drew to a close, Marcus felt the same mixture of anticipation and uncertainty that had characterized his entire artistic journey. The Willie Nelson portrait was complete, representing months of struggle and growth condensed into one powerful image. But completing it felt less like an ending, and more like a doorway opening onto possibilities he was just beginning to imagine. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and perhaps the chance to share his art with the very person who had inspired it. The young artist who'd started the week wondering how to pay rent was now contemplating how to get his work in front of a country music legend. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crystal-clear sky that made Austin's nickname, the live music capital of the world, feel like an understatement. Marcus had spent the previous evening researching Willie Nelson's ranch and various ways he might arrange a meeting with the country legend. Every approach seemed to require connections he didn't have or payments he couldn't afford, but he remained determined to find a way. The Willie Nelson portrait sat carefully wrapped in a protective cloth beside his easel as Marcus set up for what might be his final morning at the Congress Avenue corner. With the newspaper article scheduled to run over the weekend and several gallery meetings planned for the following week, his days as a street artist might soon be numbered. David arrived with his usual guitar case and an additional surprise: a worn paperback copy of Willie Nelson's autobiography. "Thought you might want to read this before you try to meet him," David explained, handing over the book. Understanding someone's story makes it easier to connect with them authentically. Marcus accepted the book gratefully, flipping through pages filled with stories of struggle, determination, and artistic integrity. The parallels to his own journey were striking. Willie had faced numerous rejections, financial hardships, and periods of doubt before finding his authentic voice and achieving lasting success. Sarah appeared earlier than usual, carrying a small wrapped package and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. "I have something for you, dear," she said, settling onto her bench with the careful movements of someone harboring a wonderful secret. Marcus unwrapped the package to find a professional-quality business card holder made of polished wood, along with a stack of freshly printed business cards bearing his name and contact information. The cards were elegant in their simplicity. Marcus Thompson, portrait artist, in classic typography, with Sarah's phone number listed as a contact point. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is incredible," Marcus said, running his fingers over the smooth wood surface. "But you didn't have to—" "Nonsense," Sarah interrupted with a wave of her hand. "Every professional artist needs proper business cards. I may be retired, but I still have connections in this city. When that newspaper article comes out, people will want to reach you directly." David began his morning set with a particularly soulful rendition of Crazy, and Marcus found himself thinking about the song's backstory. Willie had written it early in his career, but it became famous through Patsy Cline's recording. Sometimes the best art found its audience through unexpected paths, he reflected. Much like his own journey from desperate street artist to emerging professional. The morning crowd gathered as usual, but Marcus noticed an energy in the air that felt different from previous days. People seemed to be arriving with specific purpose, rather than simply stumbling upon his setup during their daily routines. Several mentioned having heard about him through friends or social media posts, suggesting that word of his work was spreading faster than he'd realized. Around 10:30, a familiar face appeared in the crowd. James Patterson, the gallery owner who had commissioned the portrait of his father. He approached with a manila envelope and an expression of genuine satisfaction. "Marcus, the portrait is absolutely perfect," Patterson announced, loud enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. "You've captured my father's spirit in a way that brings back memories I thought I'd lost. This is going straight to my office wall." Patterson handed Marcus an envelope containing his payment plus a substantial tip. I've also included information about 3 upcoming exhibitions where your work would be welcome. The art community is starting to take notice of what you're doing here. As Patterson examined the completed Willie Nelson portrait, his expression grew serious. This piece is museum-quality work, Marcus. Have you considered what you want to do with it long-term? Actually, Marcus replied, his voice carrying a mixture of determination and uncertainty, I want Willie Nelson himself to see it. I know it sounds impossible, but this painting represents everything I've learned about art and life. If he inspired it, he should have the chance to experience it. Patterson nodded thoughtfully. It's not as impossible as you might think. Willie's pretty accessible compared to most celebrities. He genuinely cares about supporting artists, especially ones from Texas. Let me make some calls. I might know someone who knows someone. As Patterson walked away, Marcus felt a flutter of hope mixed with terror. The possibility of actually meeting Willie Nelson was becoming more real, and with it came the pressure of representing his work and his story to someone who'd influenced millions of people. The morning continued with a steady stream of visitors, including several local musicians who'd heard about the collaboration between Marcus and David. A blues guitarist named Tommy Morrison stopped to examine the Willie Nelson portrait with the keen eye of someone who understood both music and visual art. You've got something special here, Morrison said, his gravelly voice carrying the authority of decades spent performing. Willie's all about authenticity, and this painting radiates it. You've captured what makes him timeless, not just his appearance, but his integrity. Morrison pulled out his phone and made a quick call. Hey, Janet, it's Tommy. You need to come downtown and see something incredible. There's a young artist here who's created the most authentic Willie Nelson portrait I've ever seen. Yeah, I'm serious. Bring your camera. Within an hour, Janet Foster, a freelance photographer who specialized in documenting Austin's music scene, had arrived with professional equipment. She spent considerable time photographing Marcus's work and interviewing him about his artistic process and connection to Willie Nelson's music. I've photographed Willie Nelson dozens of times over the years, Foster explained while adjusting her camera settings. What you've captured here is something most photographers spend careers trying to achieve, the essence of the person behind the public image. Foster's presence attracted additional attention from passersby who recognized her as a prominent figure in Austin's cultural documentation. Her endorsement of Marcus's work carried weight in the local arts community, and several people mentioned plans to attend his upcoming gallery showings. As the lunch crowd began forming, Marcus noticed an unusual disturbance in the normal flow of foot traffic. People were pausing and pointing down Congress Avenue, and a low murmur of excitement was building in the crowd. David looked up from his guitar with curiosity, trying to determine what had captured everyone's attention. Is that who I think it is? Someone whispered loudly enough for Marcus to hear. Marcus followed the crowd's collective gaze and felt his heart stop. Walking slowly down the sidewalk, wearing his characteristic braids and a simple button-down shirt, was Willie Nelson himself. The country legend was moving at an unhurried pace, occasionally nodding to people who recognized him, but maintaining the relaxed demeanor that had made him beloved throughout Texas and beyond. Oh my God, Marcus breathed, his hands beginning to shake as he realized Willie was walking directly toward his setup. Sarah reached over and squeezed his arm reassuringly. Stay calm, dear. This is meant to happen. Your grandmother is watching over you right now. David had stopped playing entirely, recognizing the magnitude of the moment that was unfolding. The crowd that had gathered around Marcus's easel suddenly felt silent and respectful, sensing they were about to witness something extraordinary. Willie Nelson continued his approach, his weathered but kind eyes taking in the scene. The young artist with his easel, the musician with his guitar, the small crowd of appreciative observers, and the carefully displayed portrait that bore an unmistakable resemblance to his own face. Marcus felt time slow down as Willie stopped directly in front of the painting, his expression unreadable as he studied the artwork with the careful attention of someone accustomed to having his image reproduced in countless ways. The silence stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then Willie Nelson smiled, not the practiced smile of a public figure, but a genuine expression of surprise and appreciation that transformed his entire face. The crowd held its collective breath, waiting to see how the legend would respond to this unexpected encounter with his own artistic representation. "Well, I'll be damned," Willie said softly, his distinctive voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "That's some fine work right there." Marcus felt his knees go weak with relief and amazement. Willie Nelson was standing in front of him, examining his art and offering genuine praise. The moment he'd dreamed about, but never quite believed possible, was actually happening. "Thank you, sir," Marcus managed to reply, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your music has meant everything to me and my family. This painting is my way of saying thank you for all the inspiration." Willie stepped closer to examine the portrait's details, his experienced eyes taking in the careful attention Marcus had paid to capturing not just physical likeness, but emotional depth. The painting seemed to come alive under Willie's scrutiny, as if recognizing its subject. "You've got a real gift, son," Willie said, turning his attention from the painting to Marcus himself. "This isn't just a portrait, it's a story. You've captured something here that most people miss, even when they're looking right at me." The crowd around them had grown larger as word spread through the downtown area that Willie Nelson had stopped to admire a street artist's work. People were pulling out phones to document the interaction, but maintaining a respectful distance that allowed the conversation to continue naturally. "What's your name?" Willie asked, extending his hand for a warm handshake. "Marcus Thompson, sir. I've been listening to your music my whole life. My grandmother raised me on your songs, and they helped us through some difficult times." Willie's expression softened further at the mention of Marcus's grandmother. "She sounds like a wise woman. Music has a way of carrying us through the hard times, doesn't it? Just like art does." "You're doing important work here, Marcus." David, who had been frozen in amazement, suddenly found his voice. "Mr. Nelson, would it be appropriate if I played something? This moment feels like it deserves a soundtrack." Willie chuckled and nodded. "Music makes everything better, son. What do you have in mind?" David began a gentle instrumental version of "Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain," and Willie's face lit up with recognition and appreciation. The impromptu performance created a magical atmosphere that drew even more observers, transforming the sidewalk corner into an intimate concert venue. "You boys are creating something special here," Willie observed, listening to David play while continuing to study Marcus's painting. "Austin needs more of this. Real artists supporting each other, creating authentic experiences for people. This is what the music scene used to be like before everything got so commercialized." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the surreal nature of the conversation. Willie Nelson was not just acknowledging his work, but offering philosophical insights about art and authenticity. The painting that had started as a desperate attempt to earn money had somehow facilitated a meeting with one of his greatest heroes. "Mr. Nelson," Marcus said, gathering courage from the warmth of Willie's response, "I know this might sound presumptuous, but would you consider accepting this painting as a gift? It feels wrong to sell something that was inspired by your music and your example." The crowd fell silent again, waiting to see how Willie would respond to such an unexpected offer. Marcus held his breath, suddenly worried he'd overstepped appropriate boundaries. Willie studied the young artist's face for a long moment, and Marcus saw recognition in the legend's eyes. Not recognition of fame or celebrity, but recognition of genuine artistic passion and generosity. It was the look of someone who remembered what it felt like to struggle for recognition while refusing to compromise integrity. "That's incredibly generous, Marcus," Willie replied slowly. "But a painting this good represents a lot of work and talent. You should be compensated for that. How about this? Let me buy it from you at a fair price, and then I'll display it somewhere special where other people can appreciate what you've accomplished." Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes. Willie Nelson wasn't just acknowledging his art. He was treating him as a peer, a fellow professional worthy of fair compensation. The gesture represented everything Marcus had hoped to achieve through his artistic journey: respect, recognition, and the opportunity to make a living through creative work. "I would be honored," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. Willie pulled out his wallet and counted out several $100 bills, far more than Marcus had ever received for a single piece. "This painting is going straight to my ranch, where it'll hang in a place of honor. Every time I look at it, I'll remember meeting a young artist who understands what authentic creativity looks like." As Willie prepared to leave, he turned back to address both Marcus and David. "Keep doing what you're doing, boys. Austin needs artists who aren't afraid to put themselves out there, who create from the heart instead of following formulas. You're both on the right path." The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause as Willie Nelson walked away, leaving Marcus holding more money than he'd seen in months and struggling to process what had just occurred. The Willie Nelson portrait was gone, but in its place was something infinitely more valuable: validation from the very person who had inspired it. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as she approached Marcus. "Your grandmother would be so proud, dear. You've just experienced what happens when authentic art meets authentic appreciation." Chapter 2. David was grinning from ear to ear as he began playing "On the Road Again," the perfect musical commentary on a morning that had changed everything. "Dude, that was incredible. Willie Nelson just bought your painting and gave you career advice. This is the kind of story people tell for decades." As Chapter 4 drew to a close, Marcus realized his life had just taken another dramatic turn. The desperate young man who'd started the week wondering how to pay rent was now holding enough money to cover several months of expenses, along with the blessing and encouragement of one of Texas's most beloved musicians. But more than the money, more than the recognition, Willie Nelson had given Marcus something priceless: confirmation that his artistic vision was valid, that his approach to capturing human authenticity was not just commercially viable, but culturally important. The encounter had transformed Marcus from an aspiring artist into a professional with a clear sense of purpose and direction. The Willie Nelson portrait had served its purpose, creating the bridge between struggle and success that Marcus had needed. Now it was time to build on that foundation and create the body of work that would define his career as a Texas artist, dedicated to capturing the authentic spirit of American music and culture. The weekend following Willie Nelson's visit brought changes that Marcus could never have anticipated. The Austin American-Statesman article had run on Saturday morning with the headline, "Street Artist Captures Austin's Soul One Portrait at a Time," featuring a large photograph of Marcus working on the Willie Nelson painting while David provided musical accompaniment. By Sunday afternoon, Marcus's phone, Sarah's number actually, since the business cards listed her as his contact, was ringing constantly with interview requests, commission inquiries, and gallery exhibition offers. Sarah had transformed her modest living room into an impromptu office, fielding calls with the efficiency of a seasoned manager, while Marcus tried to process the sudden attention. The sweet elderly woman who'd befriended him just days earlier was revealing unexpected business acumen as she negotiated on his behalf and organized his suddenly complex schedule. Rebecca Martinez from The Statesman wants to do a follow-up story about Willie Nelson buying your painting, Sarah reported, hanging up the phone and immediately writing notes in a spiral notebook she designated as Marcus's appointment book. And James Patterson called again. 3 more galleries want to meet with you this week. Marcus sat at Sarah's kitchen table, surrounded by business cards, gallery brochures, and commission requests, feeling simultaneously grateful and overwhelmed. The financial pressure that had driven him to the streets was completely gone. Willie Nelson's purchase alone had covered 3 months of expenses, but it had been replaced by the more complex challenge of managing a rapidly developing career. "I don't know how to handle all this," Marcus admitted, accepting a cup of coffee from Sarah. "A week ago, I was worried about buying paint, and now galleries are calling me. It doesn't feel real." "It's real, dear," Sarah assured him, settling into the chair across from him with her own coffee. "And it's happening because you've been authentic from the beginning." Willie Nelson recognized that authenticity, and now other people are seeing it too. "Your grandmother would say this is exactly what happens when you stay true to your gifts." David arrived mid-morning carrying his guitar and a copy of the newspaper, his face beaming with excitement. The article had mentioned him as Marcus's musical collaborator, and several local venues had already reached out about booking them as a duo for special events and art shows. "This is incredible," David said, spreading the newspaper across Sarah's kitchen table. "They got everything right. Your story, your artistic philosophy, even the community that's formed around our morning sessions, and that photo of you working while I play is perfect." The photograph truly captured the essence of what they'd created together. Marcus was shown in profile, completely focused on his painting, while David sat nearby with his guitar, both artists lost in their respective creative processes. In the background, Sarah could be seen on her bench along with several other regular observers, creating an image that conveyed both artistic dedication and community connection. "We need to talk about what comes next," David continued. "Several music venues want us to perform together, and a couple of art galleries are interested in hosting combined visual and musical events. Are you ready to move beyond street art?" It was a question Marcus had been grappling with since Willie Nelson's visit. Street art had been born of necessity, but it had also provided a freedom and authenticity that he worried about losing in more formal settings. The daily interaction with diverse audiences, the unpredictability of weather and foot traffic, the sense of art as a living, breathing part of community life. All of these elements had shaped his development as an artist. "I want to stay connected to the street," Marcus replied thoughtfully. "Galleries and formal exhibitions are great opportunities, but I don't want to lose the accessibility that makes this work special. Maybe we can do both. Formal shows that grow our reputation and regular street performances that keep us grounded." Sarah nodded approvingly. "That sounds like exactly what Willie Nelson would advise. He's always maintained his connection to ordinary people despite his fame. You can follow that same path." They spent the morning organizing Marcus's schedule and prioritizing opportunities. The Texas Music Legends series he'd discussed was generating particular interest, with several venues expressing enthusiasm for hosting exhibitions that combined visual portraits with live musical tributes to the subjects. The concept offered a way to expand his artistic range while maintaining the collaborative approach that had made his work distinctive. Around noon, Marcus decided to return to his corner on Congress Avenue, partly to continue working, but mainly to process everything that had happened. The familiar routine of setting up his easel and arranging his supplies provided comfort amidst the chaos of sudden success. The response from passersby was dramatically different from previous days. Instead of discovering his work by accident, people were arriving specifically to meet the artist who painted Willie Nelson. Some had driven from other Texas cities after seeing the newspaper coverage, while others were Austin residents who'd been following the story through social media. "Are you the guy Willie Nelson bought the painting from?" asked Jennifer Walsh, the office worker who'd been stopping by regularly. "I saw the whole thing happen, but reading about it in the newspaper made it feel real. You're going to be famous." Marcus began working on a new portrait. Stevie Ray Vaughan, this time, the legendary blues guitarist whose statue stood just blocks away on Austin City Limits Live. The familiar rhythm of painting helped calm his nerves, while David provided a soundtrack of Stevie Ray's most beloved songs, creating an atmosphere that attracted the usual crowd of art appreciation. As the afternoon progressed, Marcus noticed that several people in the crowd were taking detailed photographs and notes, clearly documenting his work process for articles, blog posts, or social media content. The private creative space he'd cultivated was becoming increasingly public, a change that felt both exciting and slightly invasive. "How are you handling all the attention?" asked a young journalism student from UT who'd been interviewing crowd members about their reactions to Marcus's work. "It's surreal," Marcus replied honestly, pausing his painting to consider the question. "A week ago, nobody knew my name. Now, people are driving from other cities to watch me paint. I'm grateful, but I'm also trying to stay focused on the work itself, rather than getting caught up in the recognition." The journalism student scribbled notes furiously. "What do you think Willie Nelson saw in your work that made him want to purchase it?" Marcus cleaned his brush thoughtfully before responding. "I think he recognized authenticity. Willie has always been about staying true to yourself, even when it's difficult. That's what I try to put into every portrait. Not just what someone looks like, but who they really are beneath the surface." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting the warm light that made late afternoon perfect for portrait work, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. Just 1 week earlier, he'd been a desperate young man wondering how to pay rent. Now he was a professional artist with more opportunities than he could reasonably manage. The transformation hadn't happened through luck or accident. It had resulted from staying true to his artistic vision, working consistently despite difficult circumstances, and remaining open to the connections and collaborations that had enriched his work. Willie Nelson's recognition had been the catalyst, but the foundation had been built through months of daily dedication to his craft. Sarah approached as Marcus began packing up his supplies, her expression mixing pride with concern. "How are you feeling about everything, dear? This kind of rapid success can be overwhelming." "I keep thinking about something Willie said," Marcus replied, carefully wrapping his work in progress. "He talked about staying authentic even when things get commercial. I want to make sure that whatever opportunities come from this, I don't lose sight of why I started painting in the first place." "And why did you start?" Sarah asked, settling onto her bench for what had become their daily closing conversation. Marcus considered the question while cleaning his brushes. "To connect with people, to show them something beautiful, something that honors the subjects I paint and resonates with the audience. Money was necessary for survival, but it was never the point. The point was always about human connection." David, who had been listening while packing up his guitar, added his perspective. "That's exactly right. And it's why what we've created here works so well. The music and the painting and the community, it all serves the same purpose of bringing people together around shared appreciation for authentic art." As the three friends walked away from the corner that had become the launching pad for Marcus's professional career, they discussed plans for the coming week. Gallery meetings, commission appointments, and venue performances would fill Marcus's schedule. But they agreed to maintain their morning sessions on Congress Avenue at least 3 days per week. "This corner is where it all started," Marcus explained. Whatever else happens, I want to stay connected to this place and this community. Street art isn't just about the art. It's about the street, the interaction with people who wouldn't necessarily seek out galleries or formal exhibitions. 2 weeks later, Marcus stood in the main gallery of the Contemporary Austin Museum, surrounded by the completed Texas Music Legends series, 12 portraits that captured the essence of musicians who had shaped American culture. Willie Nelson's portrait held the place of honor, accompanied by a placard that read, "Purchased by the subject himself, in recognition of the artist's authentic vision." The opening night crowd included many faces Marcus recognized from his days on Congress Avenue, along with art collectors, music industry figures, and cultural commentators who'd traveled from across the state to see his work. David performed throughout the evening, playing songs associated with each painted subject, while Marcus discussed his artistic process and the stories behind each portrait. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced James Patterson, who had become Marcus's primary gallery representative, "I'd like you to meet Marcus Thompson, a young artist who proves that authentic talent, combined with genuine dedication, can still find its audience in today's world." The applause was warm and sustained, but Marcus found himself thinking about Willie Nelson's words about staying connected to ordinary people. Success in galleries and museums was gratifying, but the real measure of his art's value would be its continued ability to move and inspire people from all walks of life. As the evening wound down, Sarah approached with tears of pride in her eyes. "Your grandmother would be so proud, dear. You've honored her memory by staying true to your gifts and using them to bring joy to others." Marcus hugged the woman who had become his surrogate grandmother, guardian angel, and business manager, all rolled into one. "None of this would have happened without your support, Mrs. Mitchell. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." "I just recognized what was already there," Sarah replied. "The talent, the integrity, the determination. Those were gifts you brought to that sidewalk corner. I just helped you understand their value." 3 months later, Marcus had established a routine that balanced formal gallery representation with continued street performances, commission work with personal artistic exploration, financial stability with creative risk-taking. The Willie Nelson encounter had opened doors he could never have imagined. But staying true to the principles that had attracted Willie's attention in the first place remained his primary focus. On a particularly beautiful Austin morning, Marcus was working on a new portrait, this time of a local teacher who'd commissioned him to paint her late husband, when a young woman approached with a worn backpack and a hopeful expression that he immediately recognized. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly. "I'm an artist too, and I'm having trouble finding places to display my work. I heard about how you got started here. Do you think there might be room for 2 artists on this corner?" Marcus looked up from his easel and smiled, remembering his own desperation just months earlier. "What's your name?" "Emma Rodriguez," she replied. "I do watercolor landscapes, mostly Texas Hill country scenes." "Well, Emma Rodriguez," Marcus said, gesturing toward the space beside his setup, "there's always room for authentic artists who are willing to work hard and stay true to their vision. Why don't you set up right there, and we'll see what kind of community we can build together." As Emma began unpacking her supplies with the careful reverence Marcus remembered from his own early days, David arrived with his guitar, and Sarah appeared with her usual thermos of coffee and encouraging smile. The cycle was beginning again, but this time Marcus found himself in the role of mentor rather than struggling newcomer. The Willie Nelson portrait had long since taken its place of honor at Luck Ranch, but its impact continued to ripple through Austin's art community and beyond. Marcus had learned that authentic art had the power to transform not just the artist's circumstances, but entire communities, creating connections and opportunities that extended far beyond individual success. Standing on the same corner where desperation had once driven him to set up his easel, Marcus Thompson looked around at the thriving creative community that had formed around the simple act of making art in public spaces. The young man who had worried about paying rent had become a professional artist, but more importantly, he had become a catalyst for others to pursue their own authentic creative visions. Willie Nelson's words echoed in his memory. "Keep doing what you're doing. Austin needs artists who aren't afraid to put themselves out there, who create from the heart instead of following formulas." The advice had proven prophetic, guiding Marcus through the transition from street artist to established professional while maintaining the authenticity that had made his work compelling from the beginning. As he watched Emma arrange her watercolors with the same careful attention he'd once devoted to his limited paint supplies, Marcus understood that his story was really just one chapter in the ongoing narrative of American artists who refused to let circumstances define their creative potential. The road ahead stretched out like one of Willie Nelson's endless touring routes, full of possibilities for growth, connection, and authentic artistic expression. And Marcus Thompson, no longer the desperate young man who had once wondered if he'd ever make it as an artist, was ready to travel that road with the same determination and integrity that had brought Willie Nelson to a sidewalk corner in Austin, Texas, to acknowledge a portrait that captured not just his appearance, but his enduring spirit of authentic creativity.